Number 10, the Battle of Hysiae, 669 BC, the defeat Sparta tried to bury, before Leonidas, before the Persian Wars. Before the word Spartan meant anything to anyone outside the Peloponnese, there was a valley in the Argolid where the Lacedaemonians walked into a slaughter and never talked about it again. The Argives call it Hysiae. It sits southwest of Argos, east of Tegea, a stronghold on the border with Sparta. In the summer of 669 BC, a Spartan invasion force marched up the road toward that stronghold, expecting the usual outcome. Sparta invades. Sparta takes what it wants. Sparta goes home. That is not what happened. The Argive tyrant, Phaedon, was waiting for them. And Phaedon, according to a tradition preserved by later writers, was doing something no one else in Greece had done yet. He was drilling his men to fight not as loose swarms of spearmen throwing javelins at each other and then breaking, but as a solid, interlocked wall of shields and long spears, a wall that moved as one body, a wall that pushed. The proto-Phalanx, Sparta had spearmen. Sparta had discipline. Sparta had a warrior code that was already legendary in the Greek world. What Sparta did not have on that day was the aspis. Not the larger, heavier, deeper-dished bronze and wood shield the Argives were now using. And Sparta did not have the tactical answer to what a shield wall could do to a looser formation. The two armies met near Hysiae, and Pausanias, writing 800 years later, records only one detail. The Argives won, and they buried the Spartan dead in common graves that were still visible in his own lifetime. That is it. That is all we know. No casualty numbers, no hero, no last stand, just a mass grave and a silence so complete that Sparta itself scrubbed the memory clean. But the silence tells you everything. Sparta did not commemorate defeats. Sparta buried them. And modern historians, looking at Hysiae, see the shape of what actually happened. A Spartan generation, one full peer group of citizen soldiers was destroyed in a single afternoon. The city's response was not vengeance, it was reform. Sparta went home, tore up its old way of fighting, and rebuilt itself from the ground up. It adopted the aspis, it adopted the phalanx, it adopted the training system that would produce the men of Thermopylae and Plataea a century and a half later. The whole reason Sparta became Sparta. The reason the world remembers 300 men in a mountain pass. The reason we still talk about them 2,500 years later. That reason begins with a hidden defeat on a plain the Argives conquered. Hysiae is the seed. Every battle on this list, every dead king, every burning phalanx, every collapse of empire grows from the soil the Argives salted at Hysiae in 669 BC. And Sparta never spoke its name again. Number 9, the Battle of the 300 Champions at Thyrea, around 546 BC. The real first 300. Forget the movie. Forget Leonidas. If you want to talk about 300 Spartans dying to the last man, the honest answer is that it already happened. 66 years before Thermopylae. And the man who lived, the last Spartan on the field, was so ashamed of surviving that he killed himself before the sun came up. This is the story Herodotus tells. And Herodotus was writing within living memory of the men who remembered it. In the mid-6th century BC, Sparta and Argos are still the two dominant powers of the Peloponnese. Neither can finish the other off. Their armies meet again and again over a strip of coastal land called Thyrea, north of the Spartan border, a plain worth having because it feeds soldiers. In 546 BC, the Spartans move in and take Thyrea. The Argives march out to take it back. Two full armies, each around 5,000 to 10,000 hoplites, face each other in the plain. Both sides. Look at the size of the killing that is about to happen, and both sides flinch. Not from fear, from accounting. If they fight the full engagement, both cities lose a generation of men. So the commanders make a pact that has no parallel in later Greek warfare. Each side will pick their 300 best men. The two groups of 300 will fight in the plain alone. The winning 300 will take Thyrea for their city. And the losing 300 will be dead, because the rules are strict: no prisoners, no retreat, no wounded taken from the field. The rest of both armies march away so no one can be tempted to help their champions. The 600 chosen men are left standing in the empty valley. They lock shields, they advance, and they proceed to kill each other for an entire day. There is no record of the tactics. There is no record of a decisive maneuver. What Herodotus preserves is the arithmetic of the ending. When the sun goes down, only 3 men are still on their feet. 2 of them are Argives, Alcinor and Chromius. One of them is a Spartan, Othryades. He is bleeding from wounds that will kill him, but he is standing. The 2 Argives look around the field, do the math, count the Spartan dead, and conclude the same thing. They have won. They turn and they run for Argos to bring back the news. And this is where Othryades makes his choice. He staggers through the corpses, stripping the armor and shields of the Argive dead, piling their weapons into a trophy. Because the rule of a Greek battlefield was simple, whoever held the ground and built the trophy, at the end, had won. And Othryades, alone, was still holding the ground. He tells the Spartan baggage handlers what he has done that Sparta has won by a technicality written in his own blood, and then he falls on his own sword. Herodotus says he was ashamed to go home when 299 of his brothers had not. Both cities claimed victory. The Argives said they had more survivors. The Spartans said they held the field. And so the full armies came back the next season and fought the battle the champions were supposed to prevent. Sparta won that one too. Thera became Spartan territory. But the story that lived was the story of the 300. Long before Leonidas ever put on a helmet, Sparta already had a legend of exactly 300 of its best men standing to the last against equal numbers. And the last man standing killed himself for the crime of being alive. This is the battle that gives Thermopylae its cultural muscle memory. The template already existed. Leonidas was not writing a new story. He was rewriting one, his city already told about itself. Number 8, the Battle of Plataea, 479 BC, Sparta's finest hour, and the massacre in the camp. In the summer of 479 BC, on a rolling plain in Boeotia, south of Thebes, the largest hoplite battle ever fought on Greek soil ended with the Persian general Mardonius dead on the ground and his army trapped inside its own wooden walls, being butchered to the last man. This is Sparta at the height of its power. This is the day the Persian invasion of Greece ended, and it makes Thermopylae look like the warm-up act it actually was. The numbers alone should end the argument about which battle mattered more. At Thermopylae, 300 Spartiates, a few hundred allies, held a narrow pass for 3 days and were annihilated. At Plataea, Sparta led an allied Greek army of around 38,000 heavy hoplites and roughly 60,000 lighter troops against a Persian force that Herodotus swells to enormous numbers, but that modern historians place somewhere north of 100,000 combatants. The Spartan king, Leonidas, is a year in his grave. His half-brother Pausanias, regent for the boy king, commands the Greek army. And Pausanias does something Leonidas never got the chance to do. He wins. Mardonius, the Persian commander Xerxes left behind to finish the job, sets up a fortified camp on the Asopus River. He has cavalry, he has archers, he has terrain that favors his light infantry. He wants the Greeks to come down onto the plain where he can shred them. Pausanias holds the high ground for 11 days. Both armies fake advances, both armies retreat, both armies test each other. Persian cavalry cuts off the Greek water supply by fouling the springs and blocking the supply road. On the night of the 11th day, Pausanias orders a redeployment to a new water source. The order is passed down the line. The next morning, in the confusion of a night march, the Greek army is strung out over a wide area, disconnected in 3 separate groups, still moving. Mardonius looks out from his camp, sees the Greek line broken and retreating, and he makes the mistake that ends his life. He orders a general attack. He is convinced the Spartans are running. What actually happens is that the Spartan and Tegean contingents, 11,500 hoplites on the Greek right, halt in place and turn around. Persian archers pour arrows into them for what Herodotus describes as an agonizing period. Spartans dying in place, waiting for the sacrificial omens to turn favorable. Herodotus has Pausanias sacrificing goat after goat in front of the Phalanx, refusing to attack until the entrails say yes, while his men fall around him. When the omens finally break in Sparta's favor, the Spartans and Tegeans charge. Persian arrows hit hoplite shields and bounce. Persian wicker shields do not stop a leveled Greek spear. Mardonius fights from horseback in the middle of his best troops, the picked Persian infantry, and a Spartan named Amnestus caves in his skull with a rock. When Mardonius drops, the Persian center folds. And this is where Plataea stops being a battle. and becomes a slaughter. The Persian army is not routed cleanly. It piles back into its wooden fortified camp on the Aesopus. The Athenians, who fought the Persians' Greek allies on the other end of the line, come up to join the Spartans, and together they storm the walls. Once inside the palisade, Pausanias gives the order that Herodotus records with characteristic bluntness, "No prisoners." The Persians inside the camp are trapped in a wooden box with a Greek phalanx grinding through them. Herodotus writes that of the vast Persian force that entered the camp, only around 3,000 walked out alive. The rest were killed in the enclosure. Greek casualties on the day were staggeringly low compared to the enemy: 91 Spartiates, 16 Tegeans, 52 Athenians recorded in the burial mounds, a trickle compared to the ocean of Persian dead. Plataea is the day Sparta wins the war Thermopylae failed to stop. It is the day the second Persian invasion of Greece ends. It is the largest hoplite fight in history, and it ends with a Persian general's brains on a Spartan's rock and tens of thousands of men butchered inside their own wooden walls. Thermopylae gets the poem. Plataea did the work, and more men died in one afternoon on the Aegospotami than in 3 days at the pass. Number 7, the Battle of Sphacteria, 425 BC, the day the unbreakable broke. Everything you have been taught about Spartans comes down to one word: never. A Spartan never surrenders. A Spartan never comes home without his shield. A Spartan never asks for mercy. For roughly 300 years, from the reforms of Lycurgus to the summer of 425 BC, this was not just propaganda. It was mostly true. And then, on a small, pine-covered island off the southwest coast of the Peloponnese, 292, Spartans dropped their weapons, put their hands up, and asked the Athenians whether they could please live. 120 of them were Spartiates, full-peer citizens, the bloodline, the elite. And when the news reached Greece, contemporary observers said it shook the entire Greek world to its foundations. It was, in Donald Kagan's phrase, the outcome that Spartans, it had been supposed, would never produce. The chain of events is almost accidental. In the summer of 425, the Athenian commander Demosthenes is sailing a fleet down the coast of Messenia when a storm blows him into the bay at Pylos. He notices the harbor is defensible, and lightly held, he fortifies a headland. Sparta reacts hard. King Aegeus abandons an invasion of Attica and marches west. The Spartan fleet sails to Pylos and lands roughly 440 hoplites on the long rocky island of Sphacteria, which sits at the mouth of the bay, to seal Demosthenes in. Then the Athenian navy arrives, defeats the Spartan fleet in the bay, and suddenly the Spartans on the island are cut off. Not besieged, marooned. Sparta panics. The Spartans on Sphacteria are not random soldiers. They are drawn from the best families in the city. Sparta immediately sues for peace, offering Athens whatever it wants in exchange for the men on the island. In Athens, the demagogue Cleon persuades the assembly to reject the offer. The blockade goes on for weeks. Athenian ships circle the island. The Spartans on the beach. Ration food smuggled in by helots swimming from the mainland at night with skins of grain and honey. Athens grows nervous that winter storms will break the blockade. Cleon boasts in the assembly that he can end the affair in 20 days and take the Spartans alive. He has dared to prove it. He sails to Pylos with reinforcements. Demosthenes is the actual planner. He has been waiting for numbers, and chance gives him a break. A wildfire sweeps the island and burns down the pine cover that had been hiding the Spartan positions. Demosthenes now has maps. He lands 800 Athenian hoplites, 800 light-armed peltasts, and 800 archers, plus thousands of oarsmen who can throw stones and javelins. The Spartans have around 400 hoplites left, split into 3 camps. What follows is not a hoplite battle, not the kind of thing Spartans were trained for. The Athenians refuse to close and fight in a phalanx. Instead, the light troops swarm the Spartans from a distance, peppering them with arrows and javelins and stones, then falling back whenever the Spartans charge. The Spartans wear helmets and armor that were built for close combat. They cannot see well through the eye slits. They cannot chase the peltasts through broken ground. They are slowly bled. Their commander Epitadas dies. The second in command, Hippogritas, is left for dead. Command falls to a third officer named Styphon. The survivors are driven west across the island to an old fort at the tip, where they take a last position and prepare to be killed. And then Demosthenes and Cleon do something almost as shocking as what comes next. They call off the assault. They offer terms, and the Spartans, driven to the water, out of arrows, out of food, out of officers, hold a council among themselves and choose to surrender. Of 440 who crossed to the island, 292 came off alive. 120 of those were full Spartiates. Thucydides reports that when the Athenian herald asked the surviving Spartans whether the ones who had died on Sphacteria were true men and true soldiers, the Spartan reply was one of the most cutting lines in ancient literature. The arrow. One of them said would be a valuable thing if it could tell the good men from the cowards. In other words, a light-armed weapon that killed at a distance had no way of knowing whether it was killing a hero or a fool. The prisoners were shipped to Athens and paraded through the streets. Sparta refused to attack Attica for years afterward for fear the Athenians would execute the hostages. The image of the invincible Spartan cracked in a way that could not be repaired. And this was still the era of the Peloponnesian War. Sparta was still in its warrior prime, and on a pine-choked island the size of a small town, 120 of the best men Sparta had raised in a generation walked into captivity alive. Thermopylae gave Sparta its myth. Sphacteria showed Greece the myth was breakable. Number 6. The Battle of Mantinea, 418 BC. Sparta redeems itself in blood. Sparta had 7 years to sit with the humiliation of Sphacteria. The mothers of the 120 lived in Sparta with sons who had come home instead of dying. The Athenian democracy still held the arrow that would prove which men were the good ones. And in the summer of 418 BC, on a plain in Arcadia, Sparta got the fight it had been rehearsing in its head for the better part of a decade. The largest hoplite battle of the entire Peloponnesian War. In the years after Sphacteria, a new coalition had formed against Sparta. Argos, ancient rival, dragged out of 2 generations of quiet, joined by Mantinea, an Arcadian city just north of the Spartan border, and by Elise. Athens signed on to the alliance too. The pattern was familiar. Anyone who did not want to be Sparta's neighbor was piling in on the other side. King Aegeus II of Sparta marched north with roughly 9,000 men, Spartans Arcadians, allied to Sparta, veterans of the Brasidas campaigns in the north, freed helots armed as regulars, and the elite Sciritae skirmishers. Waiting for him at Mantinea were roughly 9,000 to 10,000 men of the coalition. Argives, Athenians, Mantineans, an elite Argive regiment of 1,000 hand-picked hoplites paid by the state and trained year-round, effectively a homegrown Spartan-style unit. The 2 armies drew up on the plain south of Mantinea. Aegeus nearly made a fatal error early on. The right wing of his army, where the Spartans always stood, drifted rightward as it advanced, because every hoplite in a phalanx tries to cover his unshielded side with the shield of the man on his right. He noticed a gap opening on his left. He ordered 2 of his officers to shift men across to plug it. They refused. The Argive elite, the 1,000, saw the gap and poured through it, smashing the Sciritae and the Bristidan veterans on the Spartan left. For a few minutes, Sparta was staring at Sphacteria again. Then Aegeus did what Spartan kings were trained to do. He ignored the collapsing left. He drove straight forward with the Spartan center and right. The main Argive body and their Athenian allies broke almost on contact. Thucydides describes the moment with a kind of hushed respect. The Spartans, he writes, advanced slowly to the music of many flute players, not out of religious feeling, but so that the line could move together in step without breaking. And then they hit. The Argives ran, the Athenians ran, the Mantineans, on the far end of the coalition line, who had actually been winning against the Spartan left, looked around and saw their whole army disintegrating and pulled back too. The Argive elite regiment. The 1,000 was allowed to escape because their success on the Spartan left had cut them off, and Aegeus, coldly practical, would rather they retreated than fought to the last. When the killing was done and the corpses were counted, the coalition had lost around 1,100 dead, 700 Argives and their Arcadian allies, 200 Mantineans, 200 Athenians, and Aeginetans. Sparta lost around 300. Thucydides writes that Mantinea was the greatest single Greek battle in a very long time fought by the most famous cities. And, more importantly, he adds, it wiped away in a single afternoon the reproach that Sphacteria had left on the Spartan name. Argos abandoned the alliance. The Argive democracy was overthrown by the survivors of the Elite Thousand, who came home and took over the government. The coalition against Sparta collapsed. And for the rest of the Peloponnesian War, Sparta was Sparta again. Mantinea did not have the drama of Thermopylae. There was no last stand. There was no god king. There were just 300 Spartans dead and 1,100 of their enemies stacked in front of them, and a generation of Greeks who realized that Sphacteria had been an accident and not a lesson. Number 5, the Battle of Aegospotami, 405 BC. The afternoon the Athenian Empire died. This one was not a hoplite battle. There were no phalanxes, no plumed helmets, no spears. And yet it may be the single most devastating military victory Sparta ever won, because it ended a war that had been running for 27 years, killed an empire, and reshaped the Greek world in one afternoon on a beach in the Hellespont. The commander was Lysander, who was to Sparta what almost no other man had been in its history, a single individual whose personal genius outweighed the system. Spartan law forbade any man from holding the supreme naval command, the position of navarch, twice. Sparta broke its own rule for Lysander. They made him vice admiral under a pliable senior appointee, and everyone understood that Lysander was really in charge. He had also done something very un-Spartan. He had befriended a Persian prince, Cyrus the Younger, son of the Persian king Darius II, was in charge of Western Asia Minor and hated the Athenians. Cyrus funneled money to Lysander to build ships, hire crews, and pay them better than Athens could pay its own oarsmen. The result, by the spring of 405 BC, was that Sparta had a fleet as good as anything Athens had ever put to sea. In September 405, the Athenian fleet, 180 triremes strong, chased Lysander into the Hellespont, the narrow strait that connected the Aegean to the Black Sea, and carried every grain ship that fed Athens. If Lysander could hold that strait, Athens would starve. If Athens could destroy him there, the war could still be won. The two fleets settled into position across from each other. The Spartans at Lampsacus, a walled town with a good harbor, the Athenians on an open sloping beach at Aegospotami, Goats Rivers on the other side of the strait. The Athenian generals rode out every morning and offered battle. Lysander refused every morning. His scouts watched what the Athenians did after they returned to their beach. What they did was scatter. The Athenian ships were pulled up on the sand. The crews wandered off inland to find food, because there was no market at Aegospotami, and everything had to be scavenged. The exiled Athenian general Alcibiades, who lived in a nearby castle, actually rode down to the beach on the fourth day and told the Athenian commanders that they were about to be destroyed. "Move to Sestos," he told them, "where there is a real harbor and a market." The commanders told him to go home. On the fifth day, Lysander watched the Athenian fleet row across, offer battle, again get no answer, and row back. He watched them beach their ships. He watched the crews walk off up the beach looking for lunch, and then he attacked. The Spartan fleet crossed the strait in perfect order. There was almost no battle. The Athenian ships were on the sand, half-manned, some without crews at all. The Athenian commander Conon managed to launch 9 ships and escape. Another one, the state trireme Perillus, escaped to carry the news to Athens. The rest of the Athenian fleet, 170 triremes, was captured on the beach without a fight. Then came the executions. Lysander sailed the captured ships back to Lampsacus. He held a meeting of his allies. They voted on what to do with the 3,000 to 4,000 Athenian prisoners who had been on the beached ships. The vote was unanimous. Every Athenian was executed. Only the general Adeimantus, who had opposed a proposal in Athens to cut off the right hand of every enemy sailor captured, was spared. When the Perillus rode into Piraeus in the middle of the night and the news spread through the long walls, Xenophon wrote that a great wailing rose out of Athens that traveled from the port up through the city, and no one slept, because they knew what was coming. Athens was blockaded through the winter. In the spring of 404 BC, starving, its walls torn down by Spartan orders, its fleet reduced to 12 ships, Athens surrendered. The empire was over. The war was over. Democracy was replaced by 30 Spartan-installed oligarchs, called the 30 Tyrants. And every bit of it flowed from one afternoon on a beach when 170 Athenian triremes were caught with their crews off eating, and 3,000 Athenians were killed in cold blood. Sparta at its most ruthless, Sparta at its most complete. This was not a heroic battle. This was an execution. And it ended one of the great empires of the ancient world in a single day. Number 4, the Battle of Nemea, 394 BC, the most one-sided hoplite kill ratio in Greek history. In 394 BC, Sparta was staring at exactly the kind of grand coalition it had spent generations preventing. Athens, Thebes, Corinth, Argos, all of them lined up in the same alliance, all of them furious at Spartan overreach after the Peloponnesian War, all of them determined to break Spartan power on the Greek mainland. And Sparta, in one afternoon on the dry bed of the Nemea River, drowned the coalition in blood at a ratio that historians still argue about because the numbers seem impossible. The Corinthian War, as it came to be known, was Sparta's punishment for winning. After Aegospotami, Sparta had installed puppet governments across Greece. Sparta had marched troops into cities that had been allies. Sparta had made itself the very thing Athens had been accused of being, and every city with any independence left had had enough. The coalition army that assembled at Corinth in the spring of 394 was enormous. 24,000 hoplites, 6,000 Athenians, 7,000 Argives, 5,000 Boeotians from Thebes and its neighbors, 3,000 Corinthians, 3,000 Euboeans, roughly 1,550 cavalry. Facing them, marching up the road, from Sparta under the command of Aristodemus, guardian of the boy king, Aegospotami, was a Peloponnesian League army of about 18,000 to 19,000 hoplites, 600 cavalry, 300 archers, and 400 slingers. On paper, the coalition had the numbers. In practice, they had a command problem. The Allied army was not commanded by one general. It was commanded by a council in Corinth. Each contingent argued about which of them would hold the right wing the place of honor, and the place least likely to be flanked. The Thebans jockeyed for it. Eventually, they got it. The two armies met on the dry Nemea streambed. The battle followed the classical Greek pattern in the most brutal possible way. Each phalanx's right wing tended to drift rightward because every hoplite tried to shelter his unshielded side behind the shield of the man next to him. On the Spartan right, the Spartans stayed disciplined and drifted deliberately outflanking the Athenians on the coalition left. On the coalition right, the Thebans drifted so far right that they outflanked the Peloponnesian allies on the Spartan left. Each right won its half of the field. Each left collapsed. This is where Nemea becomes different. As the coalition right-wheeled inward, expecting to sweep across the battlefield and finish the Spartan center, the Spartans did the same in the opposite direction, and did it better. The Spartans wheeled inward too, and as the coalition contingents came off the field, disorganized, celebrating a local victory that they thought was a general won, the Spartan phalanx hit them one contingent at a time and shattered them. The Argives, then the Corinthians, then the Thebans were caught in turn on their unshielded side and cut down as they tried to reform. Xenophon, who was there, records the casualty figures with clinical precision. Sparta and its allies lost around 1,100 killed and wounded. The coalition lost around 2,800 killed and wounded. But look at the composition. Sparta's own citizen dead were minimal. Estimates suggest as few as 8 Spartiates lost their lives. The rest of the Spartan losses were among the allied Peloponnesians. The Spartan hoplite phalanx itself was almost untouched. The kill ratio, when historians extract the citizen numbers, is one of the most lopsided in Greek battlefield history. This is what a professional army does to amateurs. This is what men who have trained for combat since they were 7 years old do to citizen levies who fight once a season. And the significance goes beyond the numbers. The Nemea was the moment when the Great Coalition, the last serious attempt by mainland Greece to break Sparta, drowned in the streambed. Sparta walked off the field, having gutted the alliance. The Battle of Coronea, a few months later, fought by the returning king Aegospotami, sealed the outcome. The Corinthian War dragged on for another 8 years, but the coalition never recovered from that afternoon by the Nemea. If you want to know what Spartan military supremacy actually looked like at its ruthless peak, it looks like Nemea. Number 3, the Battle of Leuctra, 371 B. C. The day the unbreakable finally broke. In every long story of empire, there is a specific afternoon that historians can point to and say, this is when it ended. For the Spartans, that afternoon, fell on July 6th, 371 BC, on a low plain in Boeotia called Leuctra. The Spartan king Cleombrotus the first marched onto the field that morning with about 10,000 hoplites and 1,000 cavalry, including the pure Spartan contingent that had never lost a formal phalanx battle in the memory of any living man. The Theban general Epaminondas met him with about 6,000 hoplites and a plan that would change Greek warfare forever. By nightfall, Cleombrotus was dead on the field, the first Spartan king killed in battle since Leonidas at Thermopylae 108 years earlier. 400 of the 700 Spartiates who fought that day were dead. And the myth of Spartan invincibility, which had survived Sphacteria and had been rebuilt at Mantinea and Nemea, was over. Not dented. Over. Epaminondas had watched Sparta fight for years. He had studied the way the phalanx worked. The traditional Greek line was drawn up, 8 to 12 men deep, with the best troops on the right, the place of honor, opposite the enemy's weaker left. Both right wings would win, both left wings would lose, and the outcome depended on which right wing could turn inward faster. Sparta always won because the Spartans on the right were the best men on the field. Epaminondas broke the pattern. He put his best men on the left opposite the Spartan king's position, and he stacked them 50 shields deep, 50 men in each file, a dense, brutal, unbalanced column with the elite Theban sacred band, 150 pairs of hand-picked warriors under Pelopidas, at the very front. His weaker right wing he held back, refusing engagement screened by cavalry and light troops. This was the tactic later called the oblique order. Concentrate everything at one point. Refuse the rest. Break the enemy where he cannot bear to lose. The Spartan king Cleombrotus stood on his right with the pure Spartan contingent. He was a competent king, though his enemies accused him of being too friendly to Thebes. He was 43 years old. He had been Spartan king for 9 years, and he was about to become the first Spartan king to die in battle in over a century. The cavalry engagement in front of the lines opened the battle. Theban horse under Pelopidas smashed the smaller Spartan cavalry and drove it back into the Spartan hoplite line, throwing the phalanx into disorder before Cleombrotus could deploy. Then Epaminondas's massed left wing came on, 50 deep. Not marching, not walking, driving. The sacred band opened the way. Cleombrotus was hit almost immediately in the fighting on the right and dragged out mortally wounded. His personal guard, the royal companions, closed around him and were killed. The polemarch Danon was killed. Sphodrias, one of Cleombrotus' closest friends, was killed. Sphodrias' son, Cleonymus, was killed. In minutes, the entire top layer of Spartan command was lying on the ground. The Spartan right, which had never lost a fight of this kind, cracked. What was left of it fell back to their camp. Xenophon, who was hostile to the Thebans and loyal to Sparta, does everything he can to soften the account. But the truth cannot be hidden. Roughly 1,000 Spartans died. 400 of them were Spartiates, full citizens. When Leuctra ended, there were fewer than 1,000 adult male Spartiates left in the entire city. Sparta had spent 300 years training its men to be the best hoplites in the world and had never once solved its demographic problem. Every dead Spartiate was a Spartiate who could not be replaced. Leuctra was not just a defeat, it was demographic collapse in one afternoon. The follow-up made it worse. Epaminondas marched south, invaded Laconia, and did something no invader had done in 400 years. He crossed the Eurotas and stood in sight of Sparta itself. Then he freed the Helots of Messenia, the enslaved population that had underwritten the entire Spartan military system, and founded a free Messenian state. The economic base of Spartan power was destroyed. The military reputation of Spartan power was destroyed. And a Spartan king was dead on a field in Boeotia, killed in front of his own men, the first Spartan king to die in open combat since Leonidas. Thermopylae ended with 300 dead and a legend intact. Leuctra ended with 400 Spartiates dead, and the legend finished. Number 2, the Second Battle of Mantinea, 362 BC Sparta, beaten again on the same ground. Sparta had 9 years to breathe after Leuctra. 9 years of watching Thebes rearrange the Peloponnese. 9 years of Messenia standing free, with its own city walls, Spartan helots turned into citizens. 9 years of coalitions forming and unforming against Theban power in a Greek world where nobody knew anymore who the strongest man was. On July 4th, 362 BC, the same Theban general who had broken Sparta at Leuctra came back to finish what he had started. He came into the Peloponnese with an army from Thebes, Arcadia, and the Boeotian League. Facing him was a coalition that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier: Sparta and Athens. Old enemies, the two poles that had defined the Peloponnesian War, both of them standing side by side against Theban expansion. Mantinea joined them, Elis joined them. The old Spartan enemies from the first battle of Mantinea 56 years earlier were now standing with the Spartans because Thebes had become the greater threat. The armies drew up in the wide plain south of Mantinea. Epaminondas repeated the Leuctra tactic, but on a larger scale. He put his best troops in a massive column on the left. He advanced obliquely. The Spartan-Athenian coalition drew up in traditional phalanx formation. And Epaminondas did something almost sadistic in its psychological pressure. As his army approached, he had the men ground their arms as if they were making camp, as if the battle was going to be tomorrow. The Spartans and Athenians relaxed. Some of them broke ranks, word spread down the coalition line to have lunch, and then Epaminondas gave the order and the Theban phalanx picked up its weapons and charged. The Theban cavalry drove off the coalition cavalry. The massed Theban left, spearheaded by the sacred band, smashed into the Mantineans and pushed them off the field. The Mantinean commander Podarus died in the front rank trying to hold. The Spartan phalanx was next in the line, and the Theban column was on top of it, doing again what it had done at Leuctra, driving through the phalanx with an unstoppable weight of massed men. And then, in the middle of it, Epaminondas was struck. Ancient sources give 3 different names for the man who killed him: Anticratus, Macarion, Grillus, son of the historian Xenophon. Whoever it was drove a spear or a javelin into Epaminondas' chest. He was carried off the field alive, breathing around a broken spear shaft in his lung. Behind him, his intended successors, Iolaidas and Diophantus, were killed in the fighting. Every man Epaminondas had trained to take over from him died with him. He was carried up onto a small hill overlooking the battle. He asked whether his shield was safe. Yes, they told him. He had not lost it. He asked whether the Thebans had won. Yes, they told him. His men had broken through. He asked whether Iolaidas and Diophantus were still alive. No, they told him. Then he told them, according to the tradition preserved by later writers, that Thebes must make peace because there was no one left to lead them to a second victory. He asked for the spear to be pulled out. When it was, he bled out on the hilltop. On the field, the Theban left had won. The Athenian right, which was facing the Theban light cavalry and skirmishers, had actually held its own against the ill-supported Theban cavalry attack there. Both sides claimed the victory. Both sides set up trophies. Xenophon, in the last passage of his history, throws up his hands. He writes that the battle had produced only more confusion, that the winners could not enjoy their win, and that the losers could not accept their loss. The second Mantinea killed the greatest general Greece had produced before Philip of Macedon. It killed Sparta's dreams of restoration. It killed Thebes' dreams of hegemony. It left every major Greek power exhausted at the same moment. And into that vacuum, 24 years later, a one-eyed Macedonian king would ride south with his son Alexander and reshape the entire Greek world into subjects. Sparta lost again at Mantinea, but so did everyone else. And the ancient world's tradition, running through Cornelius Nepos, and later writers held that as Epaminondas lay dying, he asked whether his shield had been recovered so that he could die knowing he had not disgraced himself. Some sources give him different last words. Some say he told his officers, Thebes must make peace. Some say he answered questions about the succession. What survives across the sources is a single image. A man dying on a hilltop after winning the largest hoplite fight since Leuctra, asking whether the honor of his shield was preserved. Sparta was beaten again, but everyone lost at Mantinea. Number 1, the Battle of Selasia, 220-2 BC, the day Sparta died as a power. Sparta after Leuctra was a wounded animal. Sparta after Mantinea was smaller still. By the middle of the 3rd century BC, Sparta had shrunk to a shell. Fewer than 1,000 full citizens. A shrunken territory. A population of debtors and dispossessed men who were not eligible to serve in the Phalanx because they did not own the land the old constitution required. The Spartan king Cleomenes III looked at the ruin his ancestors had left him and did something extraordinary. He tried to bring Sparta back. He staged a coup. He killed the ephors, the elected officials who had come to dominate Spartan politics. He wiped out debts. He redistributed land. He created 4,000 new Sparteos by admitting Perioikoi and Helots to citizenship. He rearmed his men in the Macedonian style, with the two-handed sarissa pike effectively converting the Spartan phalanx into a Hellenistic one. He conquered his way across the Peloponnese, Tegea, Mantinea, Orchomenus. He beat the Achaean League in the field at Dyme. For a brief window, it looked as though a new Sparta might actually rise. The Achaean League, terrified, made the choice that ended it. Aratus of Sicyon, the head of the league, invited the Macedonians in, and Macedon, in the person of King Antigonus III, Docen, said yes. In the summer of 222 BC, Antigonus marched south with 28,000 infantry and 1,200 cavalry. Macedonians, Achaeans, Oetians, Acarnanians, Epirotes, Illyrian Ardii, the coalition army representing most of the Greek and Balkan world. Waiting for them at the pass of Selasia, 8 miles north of Sparta, on the road down into the Eurotas Valley, was Cleomenes III with 20,000 infantry, 650 cavalry, and everything Sparta had left. Cleomenes had chosen his ground beautifully. 2 hills, Olympus on his right, held by Cleomenes and the Spartan phalanx, roughly 6,000 men of Sparta itself, armed in the Macedonian style. Evas, on his left, held by his brother Eucleides, with the Perioikoi phalanx and allied troops. A road ran through the pass between the 2 hills held by the Spartan cavalry and light troops in the center. Antigonus deployed to match. Bronze shields opposite Evas, Macedonian phalanx, double depth opposite Olympus. Cavalry and allied infantry in the valley. The Macedonians attacked first up the slope against Eucleides on Evas. It was uphill work, dense Macedonian infantry pushing through fire from Cretan archers and Illyrian light troops. The turning point came when a young Achaean cavalry officer named Philopoemen, who would later be called the last of the Greeks, defied orders and led a charge that broke into the flank of Eucleides' position. Illyrian and Acarnanian troops climbed a hidden path around the Spartan left. Eucleides was outflanked, encircled, and killed. Cleomenes saw his brother's position collapse from across the valley. He looked down and saw the bronze shields consolidating on Evas. He looked at Antigonus's phalanx forming up at the foot of his own hill. And Plutarch says his morale cracked at that moment. He committed anyway. He led the Spartan phalanx down off Olympus and drove Antigonus back roughly 5 stades, half a mile. But the momentum was already gone from his army. The Macedonian pikemen, in a phalanx twice as deep as normal, absorbed the impact, held, and then began to push back. Against a phalanx of that density, the Spartans could not sustain the shove. The line broke. And what happened next is the reason Selasia sits at the top of this list. Polybius, our closest source, records 5,800 Spartan dead. Plutarch, focused on the pure Spartan contingent, records something worse. Of the 6,000 Spartans who had climbed Mount Olympus that morning to hold the right wing, only 200 walked off the hillside alive. 5,800 died in one afternoon. An entire military generation. Not one dead prince, not one dead king. The entire army of the reformed Spartan state destroyed on a slope 8 miles from home. Cleomenes rode off the field with a small escort of survivors. He rode through Sparta without stopping. He rode down to the coast, boarded a ship, and sailed to Alexandria. He would die in Egypt 3 years later in a failed revolt against the Ptolemaic government, and he would kill himself rather than be captured. Antigonus marched into Sparta unopposed. It was the first foreign army to enter the city in its recorded history. He treated it gently. He did not sack it. He restored the old ephors. He left. Sparta remained a city on the map for centuries afterward. It became a tourist attraction, a place where wealthy Romans could pay to watch boys being whipped at the altar of Artemis Orthia in a preserved in amber version of the old training system. But it was no longer a power. It could not raise a phalanx that mattered. It could not resist Rome when Rome came. It could not resist anyone. Everything that had held the Spartan system together, the military supremacy, The demographic base, the myth of invincibility, was gone. Sphacteria had cracked the myth. Leuctra had broken it. Mantinea had killed the man who broke it. Selasia buried it. Of 6,000 Spartans on the hill that morning, 200 came home. That's the ranking. 10 battles worse than Thermopylae. 10 days that killed more Spartans, ended more Spartan history, and reshaped more of the ancient world than the pass at the Hot Gates ever did. Hysiae planted the seed, and Sparta buried it. The 300 champions at Thyrea gave Sparta the template for its own myth 66 years before Leonidas. Plataea won the war, Thermopylae had failed to stop, and left Persian dead piled inside their own wooden walls. Sphacteria broke the promise that a Spartan would never surrender when 120 Spartiates dropped their spears and asked to live. Mantinea, in 418, gave Sparta the redemption it had been waiting for. Aegospotami killed the Athenian Empire in an afternoon when Lysander caught the fleet on the beach and executed 3,000 sailors in cold blood. Nemea drowned the Great Coalition against Sparta in the streambed at a kill ratio that has almost no parallel in Greek warfare. Leuctra killed a Spartan king in the front rank for the first time since Leonidas and Epaminondas' 50-deep column ended Spartan military supremacy forever. The second Mantinea killed Epaminondas himself on a hilltop asking about his shield, and left Sparta and Thebes both too weak to prevent the Macedonians from swallowing them all. And Selasia closed the book. 6,000 Spartans on the hillside at dawn, 200 alive at nightfall, a king in flight to Egypt, a Macedonian army marching through the streets of Sparta itself for the first time in the city's recorded history. Thermopylae is the story Sparta wanted to tell about itself. These 10 battles are the stories Sparta actually lived. Some of them Sparta won at a cost that emptied the city. Some of them Sparta lost so badly that the loss still shapes the way historians talk about Greek warfare. All of them killed more men than the 300 who died with Leonidas. All of them are more brutal, in the accounting that matters, than the battle that made the legend. If this deep dive into what Sparta actually did on its bloodiest fields changed the way you think about the men behind the shield, hit that like button. Every like tells the algorithm to push this to more people who want the real history behind the movie. Subscribe for more rankings and forgotten battles. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Drop a comment. Tell us which of these 10 battles surprised you the most. Tell us where you're watching from. Our community spans the entire world, and you are keeping real history alive by being here. Thank you for watching. These fields deserve to be remembered as they were, not as Hollywood painted them, and the men who fought them on both sides deserve to be counted properly. We'll see you in the next one.